Well, my friends, we have reached this pivotal point in the book of Revelation where it starts to get really crazy. And you thought it was wild and crazy before, it's even crazier at this point and forward. We've reached the throne room scene in chapter 4 and 5 of Revelation. And I don't know if we're going to get through everything today. This might be a to-be-continued message, because you've got to see what's in the center of this throne room. And it is complicated to see it. But once you see it, you're going to find out the gospel, the main message of the Bible, the message of grace. God's love for us is right at the center of this whole scene, despite how crazy it is. It's going to take some work to get there. We are going to start out with an illustration today. And we're kind of doing a throwback for this illustration. I mean, this is a really old movie at this point. This movie, I think it's from 1999. What? Was anybody even alive in 1999? I was in a room full of young adults recently, just a few days ago, and I was telling a story about 1996, and they all started laughing and giggling like it was the ancient days. Anyway, this movie's not that old. This movie is kind of part of our culture now. There's tons of great sermon illustrations from this movie. I think probably everybody knows the basic story of this movie, right? Even young people do. Kind of, so we don't have to tell the whole story. If you haven't seen it, it is super cool. I mean, just look how cool Keanu Reeves is right there. That is the coolest. You got to watch this movie if you haven't seen it. I mean, so it's really a play on a very old idea, a very old philosophical problem or idea. Can we really know that the external world, right, is real, that other people are real, and that everything I experience is as real as me? How can I know that? And the answer is very complicated. And, you know, it does it in a unique way. The idea in this film, of course, is that you're not, the world we experience isn't real. It's just an AI simulation. And you're trying to be woken up from this AI simulation. But now, the illustration I want to give you and comparison to Revelation, the book of Revelation, is twofold. It's that the book of Revelation is the same as this, but different. And it's actually the different part that I want you to grab onto, all right? So it's the same as the Matrix. The book of Revelation is similar to the Matrix in a couple of ways. The reality, it's similar in the fact that the reality you experience is just the surface. Both the Matrix and the book of Revelation, the whole Bible, carry that idea very strongly, right? In the Matrix, it's you're in this AI simulation. But in the Bible, it's that this life you experience, it's real, but it's not the deepest reality. The deepest reality is God and the spiritual realm, his kingdom. It's similar to the Matrix in terms of thinking of yourself as asleep, right? Everybody in the Matrix is really asleep. The robots have put them to sleep. Okay, but in the Bible, what we see is we're being told, and this is not a made-up story, but that this life, in many ways, we are asleep. We don't see. We need to wake up to God's reality. And it's similar, the two are similar in that in both there are powerful forces at work behind the events of your life, right? In the Matrix, it's all the AI robots are behind everything. But in real life, it is that the spiritual world is behind everything. The regular events in your life actually have to do with realities that are much deeper, right? Angels, demons, God himself, his spirit at work. But let's think about, and you're being invited to wake up in both. But let's think about how they're different as well, because this is very important. The ways that Revelation are different from the Matrix. So the Matrix is actually kind of juvenile in a way, right? If there is a deeper level to reality, if this life that we're in is not all there is, then if we were to wake up to that deeper reality, it would not be a bunch of AI robots and no sun, right? That's the stupidest thing about the Matrix. You can't live without the sun, and there's no sun. Anyway, I won't get off on a tangent. But if you were going to wake up to a deeper level of reality, that deeper level of reality would not be simpler than the one we live in right now. You see what I'm saying? Like imagine you know, there's lots of other movies that are about like, you know, you live in a video game, okay? If you lived in a video game, you know, and you were like Super Mario Brothers, a really simple one, okay? That was your whole world. And then you suddenly came out of that video game into our world, right? A higher or deeper level of reality. Things would be much more complicated, right? Inside Super Mario Brothers, it's just two-dimensional, right? And there's just little turtles you step on, and there's only a few things that can happen. But in our world, there's almost an infinite number. There is an infinite number of things that can happen. It's much more complicated. So if we really were to experience a deeper level of reality, it wouldn't be simpler than our level of reality. It wouldn't be less complex and amazing. It would be much more complex and more amazing than the world that we live in now. And that's why the book of Revelation seems so crazy. Is because what's actually happening, it's not just a made-up story. We are seeing, somehow we are glimpsing something that is far more complex and more amazing than the world we live in, a deeper level of reality. And John, who sees this, the Apostle John, is struggling to explain what he sees or even understand himself what he sees. In chapter 5, we're going to see him have a conversation with someone in heaven. And in that conversation, he's basically going to say, I don't understand what I'm looking at. I don't know. And you see this again and again in the Bible for people who are able to see in some deep way this further or deeper level of reality, the spiritual realm. So maybe that'll help us as we think about this and think about the craziness of Revelation. It reveals the reality behind the world. We've said this a number of times. Many of the things we see in the book as a whole, evil is real. Evil is real, but God reigns and Jesus is Lord. That is the fundamental reality of the world we live in, actually, the world that's behind even the world we can see. Today's message is entitled An Open Door, and we're going to look at Revelation chapter 4 and 5 today, if we get that far. And it begins, of course, with an open door. I remember where we are in the book, and we'll keep coming back to this just so we can see. We've now finished the part of the book of Revelation that is on earth, right? So it was still a spiritual vision. It wasn't a physical vision, right? It was Christ, the Son of Man in the lampstands, and it was all these letters to the churches, but it was about the earth. And the rest of the book the earth will be present, but it's a vision from heaven, the rest of the book. And right at the beginning of chapter 4, we're here right now. We're not actually going to get to opening of the 7 seals today, but we are going to look at the setup for that. There's going to be this vision of heaven and what's happening in heaven, and then something will change in heaven. That's what we're going to see in chapter 5 if we get that far. And then the 7 seals, this whole section, and we'll get into the rest of the vision as we go. But that's where we're at. So chapter 4 begins with the throne room. And for this part, I struggled all week. I don't even have, if you guys could see what I usually have up here, I have an outline of a sermon that I have up here every week. I don't really look at it because I've gone through it and I kind of know it. But I have almost nothing on my outline this week because I struggled over and over just to do anything other than address the text itself. And so, that's what we do every week, but I really don't have anything more than the text. I do have a few illustrations for us, but this is holy ground in a lot of ways, and I hope that by God's grace we'll be able to see it for what it is today. So the throne room. So we'll read through it. I'll read through some of this section of chapter 4, and as we look at this section, it's very likely you're just going to get lost. John is actually, I don't want to say he's confused in the way he describes it, but he doesn't even describe what he sees in a straightforward manner. It's almost like he gets plopped down there and he's just looking around. And one thing after another, he doesn't really describe them in order, or maybe even that he's panning out as he moves through this section. So it's quite confusing to understand at first. I did highlight some pieces in a little bit of color, just so that maybe the vision will come a little bit more alive for us. There are no good pictures of this. If someone is an amazing artist, I can't understand how no one has drawn an accurate picture of the throne room scene in Revelation. You can find hundreds of depictions of it on the internet, and they're all messed up in all kinds of different ways. That is, they don't follow the text, and I can't understand it. So we're going to have to just imagine this, but I will give you some pieces to latch onto as we imagine it. So here's what he says, and we'll see what we can do with this. After this, so after he wrote down all these letters to the churches in Revelation, he looked, and there before me was an open door, a door standing open in heaven. That is in the sky. Now he's in a cave, so I don't know, maybe he's looking out of the cave into the sky, or maybe the whole vision is just inside the cave and he sees the sky. I don't know. But it is not just, but it's through the sky into the heavenly realm. And the voice I had heard at first speaking to me like a trumpet, so that's the voice of Jesus, the voice of the Son of Man in chapter 1. That voice said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." So the whole rest of the book in some way is going to be about the future, the things that will take place after these things. This is just powerful. The voice of Christ calling to him, "Come up here, come up here." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. What does it mean that he was in the Spirit? He said that a couple of times already in the book. It very likely means something like the Apostle Paul describes in 2 Corinthians 12. So John is actually, we're going to see this, John is not the only person to see a vision of heaven like this. There were many people in the Old Testament who saw it. Some of them wrote down descriptions of it. Some of them were not allowed to write down descriptions of it. And I think the Apostle Paul actually saw something very much like what John saw. But the Apostle Paul said that once he had seen it, he was told he could not write it. He was not allowed to tell anyone what he saw. But he says in 2 Corinthians 12, when he's talking about that vision, the vision of the third heaven, as he calls it, meaning the spiritual realm, he says he doesn't know whether he was in the body or out of the body when he had the vision. Meaning he couldn't tell. It was so dramatic and overwhelming that he couldn't tell whether he was somehow, it was just his spirit was experiencing this, or if his actual physical body had been moved into heaven. He could not tell which of those two things was true. And I suspect that's probably true of John as well. He's trying to describe this. I was in the Spirit. Basically, his whole reality just changes all of a sudden. He no longer is experiencing the cave in any way that he was just in before. And what he sees first is a throne in heaven and someone sitting on it. We don't know who. It's kind of funny almost that he doesn't know who, or he describes it that way. The one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. That is, there was a red, glowing person sitting on this throne. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. So human beings on 24 other thrones in a larger circle. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. He's referred to that once already, the 7 spirits of God. What in the world does it mean? In front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass. This almost becomes confusing for us. Why is there's like an ocean or something near this throne? Where is it compared to all this other stuff? Clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living creatures. Now he's back to the center. Remember I said he describes it out of order. He does. Now he's back to looking at the center. He notices there are 4 living creatures in the center. And they were covered with eyes in front and in back. If you know your Old Testament, there are many visions like this in the Old Testament of what we might call, what they do call cherubim. Strange word. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. And the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. So it's almost hard to picture this, right? How in the world does it look like? How can you even tell what it looks like if it's covered with eyes on every square inch of its body? It must almost just look like you can see why it's hard to depict. Anybody who tries to depict the living creatures, certainly in art, depicts something that is not very pleasing for the most part, to say the least. Day and night, they never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns down before the throne. And they say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." All right, so what we've got here, what's happening, you have sort of this static scene. There is some worship happening, but what's happening is we're being shown sort of the status quo, what's happening all the time in heaven. And in chapter 5, we're going to see some things start to change in heaven. But what's happening all the time is this worship, and it is worship that radiates out from the center. The throne is actually at the center. There's all of this power, energy, lightning coming from the throne and light. And then just outside the throne, you have these living creatures who are declaring the glory of God. And whenever they declare that glory of God, which is all the time, then the elders in this circle around them, they all bow down, they get on their knees, and they do that. We've talked about the proskuneo. They put their faces on the ground, they put their crowns down on the ground, and they worship the one on the throne in the center. So it's this worship that radiates out from the center of the throne. But what in the world is all of this imagery doing? I want to show you a verse from Hebrews, and this is also connected to a verse that's in Deuteronomy, all the way back in the Old Testament, Moses. This is what the writer of Hebrews says about the temple. He's in the middle of explaining to us about the temple in Jerusalem, right, which no longer exists, but did at that time. It did at the time the writer of Hebrews wrote this. By the time the Revelation is written, that temple on earth had been destroyed. They, the priests, he says, serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. So what he's saying here in Hebrews is that the temple, the Jewish temple that existed on earth, was actually a copy of something that's real in the heavenly realm. It wasn't just there's lots of symbolism in that Jewish temple, and there's a purpose. There was a purpose for it in training the people of Israel, but it wasn't just that. It's actually a copy of something that is in heaven itself. And he says this is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. Now, what's the tabernacle? You remember before the Jewish people built the temple, there was a tent, right? A tabernacle. We'll look at it in just a minute. That's what they worshiped in, and it was set up in a particular way. And when Moses built the tabernacle, he was told, "See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain." Now that's a story, whatever that's referring to, is not a story that Moses wrote down. But it's very clear Moses was shown something when he was on Mount Sinai, when the Lord came down in burning fire with what coming out of the mountain? Lightning and peals of thunder. He was shown something that exists in heaven. And he was told to build a tent and set it up in a way that's kind of like what he saw. This is what he set up. This is the tabernacle. Or, it doesn't show you the actual tent. The covering of the tent doesn't really matter. It was covered. It is important to know that it was covered. It was covered with actually 7 layers on that outside. This was no ordinary tent. This was a very serious tent. It took a long time and many people to put it up. In the very center of the tent, now I know it's not the center, but the most important place in the tent, was the Ark of the Covenant. We'll look at the Ark in a minute in more detail, but that Ark of the Covenant was the place where God said he would appear, he would live, he would show himself to his people on or in, around that tabernacle. It was just a box made out of, it was lined with gold. Lots of gold was going on in this. A lot of things were lined with gold in the temple and the tabernacle. And that was in this section that they called the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. And no one was allowed to go in there. There was this veil in front of it. Now, on top of the Ark of the Covenant, there were 2 cherubim, living creatures on top of that Ark. They were positioned facing each other, and the idea was the Lord was going to appear somehow right in between them, right at the center. Do you see what's happening here? Now, just outside is this veil, and what's on the veil? 2 cherubim. And then we see outside that Holy of Holies, this is the holy place, this other bigger room in the tabernacle. And it had 3 things in it. We'll get to these 3 things later when we look at the vision. But the 3 things, just for now, were an altar of incense, a table that had bread on it. They called it the bread of the presence, like God's presence. And then a lampstand with how many branches? 7 branches. We've talked about that. Then there was another veil. And then this is important, outside of the tabernacle. So in the courtyard surrounding it, where really only the priests went and some Israelite men went there as well, were 2 important things. This diagram calls one of them the laver. That just means the place where you wash. And an altar. There was an altar of sacrifice, and there was a big basin where the priests would wash themselves. Okay? This is getting weirder and weirder. But do you see, are you starting to see? What's happening in Revelation chapter 4 is we are seeing what's behind all of this. John is seeing somehow what Moses saw. Now, here's another depiction. This is the depiction of Solomon's temple. So the temple was built just like the tabernacle, but it was much bigger. It was much bigger, and it was much more ornate. But all the symbolism and the kinds of things that were placed, where they were placed, were all the same. And look what is outside this temple. Now, here you had this little wash basin and this altar, but when Solomon built it, he went huge, because Solomon did everything big. He was like, go big or go home, Israelite king. And so he built a massive altar, right, that almost looked like a mountain. That was the altar of sacrifice. And he built this other thing that was absolutely massive. It might not have been quite as big as it's depicted in this painting, but it was very large. It was a place for the priest to wash, and it was so big. Do you know what they called it in the Old Testament? They called it the sea. The sea. The bronze sea. It was actually made of so much bronze, it took so much bronze to make it, that no one at that time had anything that could weigh the bronze. So they did not know how much bronze it took. Couldn't be weighed in those days. So notice outside the temple is a sea. What's in the vision that we see? There's a glass sea. Now, if you look inside the temple, that's very similar. This is a depiction here with the sea and the altar outside. You can kind of see inside the temple. This is the holy place with the lampstands. The temple actually had 10 lampstands, but that's just sort of to go bigger. It's really one lampstand being represented. You can see also the cherubim. In the temple, it was a little bit different. You had the 2 cherubim on top of the altar, on top of the ark, but you also had 2 large cherubim flanking the ark. How many cherubim does that make in all? 4. 4 cherubim surrounding the ark. Now, if we zoom in on the ark itself, This is kind of a cool picture of the ark. We don't really know exactly what it looked like, but you can see the depiction of these two angelic beings here putting their wings over the ark. And this spot right on top of the ark, this is really what the ark was all about. The ark is a box, and it had some regular kind of stuff in it. I mean, important stuff from Israel's history. The tablets of the Ten Commandments were in it. Aaron's staff that budded was in it. Some of the manna that the Israelites had eaten in the wilderness. But the most important part of the ark was actually on top. And that was this cover, this thing that you could translate as a cover, but really is best translated. We don't have time to get into all of why, but it's best translated the way that the King James Bible translated it, actually. And the way that Martin Luther originally translated it in German this way, as the mercy seat. It is the place where God would come and sit. And the ancient Israelites thought of this as Yahweh or Jehovah's throne. That was his throne. So the ark is not just a box. It's not even just a place where God lives. It's his throne. It's his throne. This is powerful. There's also lots of stuff that happened with the ark. There's sacrifice that happened connected with the ark. So let's go back and look at this chapter 4, see what we can grab out of it, because this is the temple. We are being given a vision of the heavenly temple. So first of all, he sees a door standing open in heaven. So he enters this vision through a door. What's another word for a door? There's a couple ways you can translate the Greek word that's translated door here. And another way you could translate it is gate. How did you get into the temple? Through the gates. That's why it's a door. That's why it's not just heaven torn open. It's a gateway opened in the heavens because he is entering the heavenly temple. We see the throne in the middle, someone sitting on it. So the Lord, Jehovah, the God of the universe, is sitting on his throne in the center. We see he's jasper and ruby. He's glowing. There's a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircling the throne. Now, what in the world is this rainbow? Well, there was something that sort of encircled the ark, right? That separated the ark and the Holy of Holies from everything else. What was it? It was that veil, right? That veil that they had. So that no one would get in there and die in the presence of the Lord. That's why. But now, instead of a veil, what happened to that veil, actually? When Jesus died, literally, physically, that veil was torn in half. So there was no more veil. So there's still a distinction here. There's something that shows almost where the veil was, but you can see through it. The way into the Holy of Holies is open now. Surrounding the throne, I'm going to skip a little bit because, remember, he tells this out of order. So probably still inside that emerald rainbow, you've got these 4 living creatures. You've got the 4 cherubim around the center of the ark, around the center of the throne. And then, skipping back, outside of that, you've got the 24 elders. So you got to imagine this in your head. So at the center, you've got the throne, and the Lord is sitting on it. And then you've got these living creatures, these cherubim around it. And then you've got this rainbow, which is where the veil used to be. Now, if you think about this, if Moses made everything according to what he saw, way back, thousands of years before this, and he made the temple, he made the tabernacle with a veil there that you could not see through, then that's what he must have seen on the mountain. He must have seen a veil that you couldn't get through, but now it's different. So the vision in heaven, even though it's similar to what Moses saw, it's actually the same in many ways, something has changed in those thousands of years since Moses. Something has actually changed in heaven, which is what we're told. We're told that when Jesus died, and then when he rose from the dead and entered the heavens, the writer of Hebrews tells us that he entered the heavenly tabernacle. and he changed things. The way to the throne is open. So that there's the emerald, and then outside the emerald, you've got this ring of 24 elders. They're all sitting on thrones. These are human beings somehow. Who are they? What are they doing? What are they like in the temple? They're like the priests in the temple. They're outside the very center. They're in the holy place, and they are worshiping. They're ministering in some way. Why are there 24 of them? Well, 24 is 2 times 12, and 12 represents the people of God in some powerful ways, right? The people of God, there were 12 disciples who followed Jesus. There were 12 tribes of Israel, right? And both of those groups are, in a sense, leaders who are supposed to lead the rest of the world back to God. They are priests who are going to minister to others and bring people closer to God. So that's who these people are. Now, it's pretty weird because if you think about it, if these 24 people represent 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles, then what is John? He's one of the 12 apostles. So I've always had this thought, is he looking at himself? Is one of these guys actually him sitting around this throne? And I think the answer is no. Because otherwise I think John would have had to say something about it. It's not like he actually sees, oh, there's Peter and there's my brother James. It's not quite like that. These, I think, in the vision represent the people of God, but they are not literally the 12 sons of Jacob or the 12 apostles. They have crowns of gold on their head. They're putting those down. There's the flashes of lightning. So there's all this, just like all this power came from the ark in the temple. And then you got the lamps, which are like the candelabra. But remember, instead of one lampstand with 7 different branches, just like in the vision in chapter 1, we now have 7 separate lamps. Why? Because the temple has expanded into the whole world. If you think about it, you also notice in this vision, there's no tent. There's no covering. There's no building. He doesn't really tell us what he's seeing like above, but it's clear. It's almost like a celestial vision. This temple in the heavens is expanded everywhere. It's not in a building in one place anymore. It's expanded into all of creation, perhaps. And then in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass. Now, it clearly can't be right in front of the throne. I think it must be back further, especially when we think about how the temple was constructed. Because in a minute, or maybe next week, when we get there, you're going to see there's a lot going on between the sea and the 24 elders even. But what John sees is he sees this massive sea. This is just like the temple. But there's some things we don't see. And you'll notice here, one of the things you don't see is there's no altar of sacrifice in this vision. It's not there. Can anyone think why that would be? There's no altar of sacrifice. Okay, let's jump forward. You can write this down if you want in your notes. The heavenly temple is open. This is a huge part of what this is trying to communicate to us. I think for people who had experienced the temple, this would have been much more apparent. They would have seen this because they knew the temple. Maybe they hadn't been inside all of it, certainly not in the Holy of Holies, but they knew what was there, and they had experienced much of the temple. And when they start to hear this vision, certainly John knew a lot more than we automatically do when he saw this vision, or at least as he thought back on it. And one of the things you would recognize is that the temple is now open. There's no walls. The gates are open. There's no veil. The whole way is open. The way back to God is clear. It's been opened by someone. Chapter 5, we'll get into this and see. We'll just read a little bit of it, and then we'll pick this up next week, because I want to take enough time this week and next week that we can really see the core of what chapter 5 is going to bring across to us. And it is dramatic. It is the very heart of God. Because in chapter 5, so if chapter 4 is sort of setting the scene, chapter 4 is like, here's what's going on all the time in heaven. Chapter 5 is now we see something start to happen in the heavens. This is the beginning of what's coming, what's going to happen after all these things that John has been experiencing. And here's what we see at the beginning. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne, a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. It's interesting, they translate this scroll, and it is best translated scroll because books probably didn't exist yet. But you know what this word is in Greek? It's biblion. It's the word Bible. I like to translate it that way in my head. I saw him who sat on the throne, and what he had was a Bible with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. And I wept and wept, because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. I think this one line alone right here shows you a lot about the character of this vision and what it was like. John was there for a long time. I don't know how time works. It seems like time is different in this realm. But John, it's not like all this stuff is just bang, bang, bang immediately after one another. John has enough time in this vision that he describes himself as having wept and wept because no one was found. He watches while a whole search is done of heaven and earth to find anyone who can open this book. The God of the universe is holding a book, and the book represents everything he's going to do, his plan for the future. And his plan obviously is going to be good, right? It's going to be good because everyone who's around the throne, they are dying for this book to be opened. The thing they want more than anything else is that this book would be opened and it would be read out, because when it's read out, it will happen. And yet many of you know what's going to be in this book, right? Tribulation after tribulation, disaster after disaster, destruction after destruction, horror after horror is what the book is going to be read out of this book. What in the world is going on? Why are they dying for this book to be read? We'll have to get to that next week, but a little bit more for this week. I love this part too. So one of the elders, and I think this part how we know it's not these actual people. One of the elders comes up and speaks to John. John is, I'm going to imagine he's on his face, weeping and weeping for hours perhaps. One of the elders comes up to him, just like Jesus had come up to him in the earlier vision when he was on his face and picked him up. And the elder says to him, "Do not weep. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." And then he sees a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures. It's a lamb, and you might think, again, how would you even depict this? It's a lamb looking as if it had been slain, but then it has 7 horns and 7 eyes. And the 7 eyes are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And the Lamb, he goes and he takes the scroll from the hand of the one who sits on the throne. And you could ask yourself maybe this week as you read through this, which I highly encourage you to do, who is on the throne? Because in this vision, it goes back and forth. There's the Lord, this Yahweh is on the throne. There's the Lamb is on the throne. The Lamb and the Lord are on the throne. The Spirit is on the throne. Somehow, it's almost like there's 2 or 3 people on the throne. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. All right, we're going to have to stop there for today. We've gone on too long. But hopefully, think about that this week. And this is sort of a building message because we're going to need to get to the main point of these chapters next week. So we're going to need to draw on everything we used this week. But this week we can focus on heaven being open, the way back to God being clear. Let's pray. We'll continue in worship.